Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Torah studies class for the Torah portion of Yisro. Lift your hands above your head, reaching the pinnacle of human achievement and beyond. So it's a very important Torah reading this week. It's a Torah reading that includes the giving of the Torah. It's a Torah reading that includes the giving of the Ten Commandments. And it's a Torah reading that has a beautiful family reunion. And that is where we are going to start our class today with a family reunion. Text number 1. Now Moshe's father-in-law, Yisro, the Kohen of Midian, heard all that God had done for Moshe and for Israel, his people, and that God had taken Israel out of Egypt. Now Moshe's father-in-law, Yisro, and Moshe's sons and his wife came to Moshe to the desert where he was encamped, to the mountain of God. Moshe told his father-in-law about all that God had done to Paro and to the Egyptians on account of Israel, about all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and that God had saved them. Yisro was happy about all the good that God had done for Israel, that he had rescued them from the hands of the Egyptians. Thereupon Yisro said, "Blessed is God who has rescued you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of Paro, and who has rescued the people from beneath the hands of the Egyptians." So the Torah portion begins with Moshe's father-in-law Yisro, together with Moshe's wife Tzipporah and Moshe's 2 sons, traveling from Midian, joining the Jewish people in the desert. This is not just a story of a family reunion. Yisro was not just the father-in-law of Moshe. Yisro was a very prominent world figure at the time. Yisro was a prominent pagan priest. He was a very prominent religious leader in his community, and his reputation spread to much of the world. And what did he do? He chose to throw it all away. He rejected his religious beliefs. He rejected his religious authority. He rejected the fame and the authority that he previously had. He left Midian to become part of the Jewish people. The Zohar tells us that this was a huge deal. This was incredibly important. And his converting to Judaism, his leaving his pagan lifestyle, his leaving Midian and coming to join the Jews had a huge impact in the Jewish people actually receiving the Torah. Text number 4 here we're going to is from the Zohar. Yisro, the greatest of all pagan priests, arrived and swore fealty to God, stating, "Now I know that God is greater than all the deities." At that moment, God's glory was resplendent in both the greatest heights and lowest realms. Thereafter, God gave a perfect Torah that reigns supreme over all else. The Torah seems to be saying that it wasn't until Yisro came to join the Jewish people that God was prepared to give the Torah. As it says, thereafter, God gave a perfect Torah that reigns supreme. Once Yisro dedicated his commitment to the Jewish people, was it possible for God to actually give us the Torah? So we need to understand, right? We say that once Yisro arrived, right, throwing away his status and prestige, the Jews were ready to receive the Torah. Why? What is the connection between the personal experience of Yisro and his move from pagan religious leader to committed and dedicated Jew? Why and how did that set the stage for the Jewish people to receive the Torah? And of course, we need to know, what can we learn from Yisro and how we can accept and receive the Torah? So we're going to switch topics for just a few minutes, but you're going to see the relevance shortly. So there's an idea called personal space. Most people feel that surrounding them is a few feet that they would describe as their personal space. And if another person came into those feet, if another person came into that space, you would feel uncomfortable, and you might even say that another person is violating your personal space. Now, is there any legal ramifications, any legal significance that a person entered into your personal physical space? Unfortunately, there is not. Right? From the secular legal perspective, a person can get as close as they want to you, as long as they're not physically touching you, and there's simply nothing you can do about it. However, from a Torah perspective, in Jewish law, there is actually something that is called your physical space, and it does have legal ramifications. So what is that? All right, we forgot about that. All right, what is it? It says that 4 amos, which is 4 cubits, surrounding a person are considered his or her personal space. So first of all, what is the definition? In Hebrew, the term amma, which is often translated as a cubit, is essentially this distance, right? That's the distance of a cubit. Technically, how do you define it? There are debates in Jewish law. It's essentially between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. So 4 cubits is essentially between 6 feet and 8 feet. And this isn't just 6 feet in one direction. It means you have 4 amos square, right? You have 6 to 8 amos square going in each direction. Sorry, it's technically 8 amos square because it's in each direction, 4 to your right and 4 to your left. That is going to mean 8 amos. So from the Torah perspective, a person absolutely has your own personal, private, physical space, and that space absolutely has some practical and legal ramifications. Let's go for a few of them. All right, this text number 6 comes from Maimonides, his Code of Jewish Law, the laws of robbery and lost objects. A person's courtyard can acquire property for him without his being aware of it. Thus, if a lost object falls into a person's courtyard, he acquires it. Similarly, the area within a radius of 4 cubits next to the place where a person is standing can acquire property for him, like his own courtyard. If a lost object come into these 4 cubits, he acquires it. So the Rambam tells us that in Jewish law, there's something called, there's an idea that your courtyard, your property, your real estate can acquire anything that lands or falls into it. In exactly the same way, if an object falls into your 4 cubits, if it falls into your personal space, that is as if it is your courtyard, and your personal space can actually acquire items for you. Our sages ordained this convention so that people who discover lost articles should not come to strife. When is this convention employed? In an alleyway or at the sides of the public domain, which are not crowded with many people, or in a field that is ownerless. When, however, a person stands in the public domain or in a field belonging to a colleague, the area within a radius of 4 cubits cannot acquire. So what this means is, if you are standing in an open field next to an object that has been lost, that does not have any identifying markers, so there's no way that it can be returned to the original owner, just by the virtue of you standing within 2-3 feet of it, it's yours, you own it, it is as if you're holding it in your hands, and no one else can grab it and take it. Now the Rambam says this would not apply if you are in the middle of a crowded street, where by definition people are invading your personal physical space, so therefore in that sense, you can't say you own it. But from a halachic, legal, practical perspective, if an object, a lost object, is within 4 cubits of your body, you are absolutely the owner. The concept of your personal space has applications when it comes to the laws of marriage and divorce as well. The Torah tells us that one of the ways that a person can marry someone is giving a person a document of marriage. That document of marriage has to reach the woman's hand. The Torah tells us that the only way that you can divorce a woman is through a written document, and that written document also has to reach the woman's hand. What is the definition of a woman's hand? Let's go now to text number 8. This is also from Maimonides from the Rambam. He writes, the following rules apply if a woman holds her hand at an incline. Her husband throws a get is a divorce, to her hand, and it falls to the earth. If it falls within 4 amos of where she is standing and comes to rest there, the divorce is effective. So even if he doesn't actually place the divorce in her physical hand, provided that he places the divorce within her 4 cubits, it is considered as if he placed it in her hand because he placed it in her personal private space, and she is considered to be divorced. Another practical application of this law of personal space of 4 amos comes to the law of carrying on Shabbos. Okay. On Shabbos, it is prohibited to carry outdoors in a public location, in a public domain, which is why in Bayside we have an Eruv, right? An Eruv allows a person to carry outside on Shabbos. In order to violate the prohibition of carrying an object outdoors on Shabbos in a public domain that does not have an Eruv, you have to transport the object 4 amos, 4 cubits. If you transfer it less than 4 amos, you are not in violation because you are considered to be within your own personal space. Once you go beyond 4 amos, that's outside of your 4 cubits, then you are going to be liable. The concept of 4 amos is also relevant to prayer. Jewish law says, if you see a person that is davening, you see a person that is praying with concentration, the person is praying sincerely, you are prohibited from walking within 4 amos of them. You are not allowed to enter into their private physical space. That will be some form of disruption of their prayer. So let's recap some of the laws that we stated regarding 4 amos. Number 1, the 4 amos rule of personal space applies in rabbinic laws of ownership and in the laws of marriage and divorce. As I mentioned before, it's not supposed to be a circle. It's really a square. So it's a side point. Carrying and travel on Shabbos is also limited to 4 amos. And finally, respect for personal space applies during prayer and in an obligation of respect to a scholar. So we have demonstrated multiple areas of Jewish law where the concept of physical space has ramifications. The definition of that physical space is 4 amos, but where did that definition come from? Why should 4 amos be the precise definition of a person's physical space? So we go to text number 11 from the tractate of Eruvin in the Talmud, and the Talmud gives this explanation. What is the scriptural source for the 4 amos within which a person is always permitted to walk on Shabbos? As it was taught, the verse states, remain every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day, meaning one must restrict to an area equal to his place. And how much is the area of his place? You may remember this quote, which was in last week's class as well, which I did record and send to some of you. A body typically measures 3 amos, and an additional amma is needed to allow him to spread out his hands and feet. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says a person's body measures 3 amos, and an additional amma is needed in order to allow him to pick up an object from under his feet and place it by his head. So here we have the text from the Talmud. The Talmud says, where did this number 4 amos come from? It says the average typical person is 3 amos tall. Now, of course, we know some are much taller, some are much shorter, but let's say the average is 3 amos. Let's say the average person is 3 amos. Now, you could make an argument to say that 3 amos is considered to be a person's personal space. Your personal space should correspond to the size of your body. So if a typical body is 3 amos, then the legal definition of your personal space should be 3 amos. However, the Talmud says no, it's actually 4 amos. Why is it 4 amos? In order that a person should be able to stretch out their hand over their head, therefore you get an additional amma. Now, why? Now, it's true that a person has the ability to stretch out their hand over your head, but you're never going to go to the doctor and they're going to try to check your height. And you line up against the thing and you stick your hands up. Okay, I'm ready. Now, please, you can measure me. Doesn't work like that. You're only as tall as the top of your head. Why does the Torah add this dimension of lifting your hands above your head as part of the measurement of your personal space? Why is it 4 amos? The Lubavitcher Rebbe gives a fascinating explanation. This is definitely more from the Hasidic perspective, the inner dimension of the Torah. The Rebbe says like this: a human being's ability to lift their arms up and raise them above your head is not just a side ability. It's not just a skill that some person may have. It's not just an ability of the body. It actually is the very definition of what it means to be a human being. The ability to raise your hands above your head is so fundamental to what it means to human being. Therefore, our sages had to add that extra amma to the legal definition of what a person's private physical space is. What did the Rebbe mean by that? The Rebbe says you could divide up the human body into 3 sections. You have the legs, you have the torso, and you have the head. These represent the 3 components, the 3 facets of the body, of the physical existence of the human being. Which of these 3 parts of the body would you say define the human being? Which parts of the body express what it means to be a human being at the highest level? The answer, of course, would be the head, the seat of our brain, right? The place where we're able to differentiate ourselves from any and all beings by exercising free choice, by exercising rationality, by exercising logic. Right? That is what sets apart and differentiates the human being from all other animals. However, the Rebbe says there is something more to being a human being that has to transcend even our head, that has to transcend our logic, that has to transcend our rationale, and that is represented by our hands being able to be lifted over our head, which means that a human being has to also be able to transcend the limitations of our own mind. We have to be able to rise above the limitations of our own logic and rationale and connect with something that's deeper, that's greater, that's transcendent, which of course is God himself. This is text number 12 from the Rebbe. Naturally, a person takes up the space of 3 amos, corresponding to the 3 umbrella parts of the body, namely the head, the torso, and legs. According to the rules of creation, the head is the loftiest part of the person, then the torso, and finally the lowest part, the legs. In this scheme, the hands, which extend out of both sides of the torso, are lower than the head. It is each person's task to reach beyond the 3 amos designated to humanity at creation, to reach beyond the peak of what a human can naturally achieve, namely beyond the head, the seat of reason. In other words, a person should use his or her reason, and instead of getting stuck in the parameters of that very power of reason, break free and engage in matters that are beyond what the head can reach on its own. In other words, human beings are not just a smarter version of a cow. We're not just a more sophisticated version of a cow. A human being has the ability to rise above our reason and our rationale. In many situations, as we'll discuss later, it is our rationale and our logic and our reason that's holding us back and that limit us. We need to be able to rise above. So what is significance of the 4 Amos? It is to reach beyond the power of reason and touch the divine. This is the purpose of humanity. Therefore, it's part of the definition of a person's limited space. Let's try to apply what we're talking about here to how we are meant to receive the Torah and how we are meant to relate to the Torah. So what is the Torah? The Torah has multiple components. There's a segment of Torah that contains wisdom, philosophy, ethics, morals, right? Incredibly profound guidelines for how to live, as well as actual rules and regulations, right? Mitzvahs and traditions as to how a person should live, run their life, and actually run a society, a government, and an economy as well. This could be considered to be the body of the Torah, right? The content of the Torah, right? That is from the first, that would be considered the first 3 Amos, so to speak, of the Torah. However, we have to recognize that the Torah is much more than that. The Torah is much more than the content. Because what is the Torah? The first word of the 10 Commandments is the word Anochi. The word Anochi translates as I. I am God, your God. Our sages comment that the word Anochi for I is an acronym for Ana Nafshis Kesavis Yehavis, which means I have given over my essence to you in writing. That means the Torah is not just a book of laws or a book of wisdom. It's not just a book of rules. The Torah is God giving over his essence to us. When we learn it, when we study it, when we practice it, we're connecting to God on the most intimate level and in the deepest possible way. This segment, this element of the Torah, which is the essence of the Torah, which transcends the wisdom and the rules and the regulations, that corresponds to that 4th Amma. That corresponds to the essence of the Torah, where we have to lift ourselves up beyond and above just the rules and the regulations, and to recognize we're connecting to something deeper, more powerful, that we're connecting to the essence of Hashem as well. The text number 13, back to the Zohar. Come look, what a person is visible, so come, look. What a person wears is visible to all, and only the foolish will look at a person with nice clothing and look no further. The body and its clothing are a metaphor for the body and soul. The Torah has a body, namely the mitzvahs, which are very dressed up in the terms of our world, like a body and clothing. The foolish only look at the clothing, namely the stories of the Torah, and do not bother looking to see what lies behind the clothing. But those who know better do not suffice with looking at the clothing alone, rather at the body that lies underneath the clothing. The wise servants of the eternal King, who stood at Mount Sinai, looked only at the soul of Torah, the main part of Torah. So the Zohar tells us that the Torah has a body and the soul, and the body is critical. We interact with the body, we observe with the body. That's the Torah and the mitzvahs that we study, that we learn, and that we practice. But we have to recognize and be aware that it's holy, that it's divine, that it's spiritual. Sometimes a person could get lost in the rules and the regulations. Yes, they're absolutely required and necessary, but remember that we are forming a deep and intimate bond with Hashem, and that was the experience of Mount Sinai. The experience of Mount Sinai was not signing on the bottom line of a contract, a long legal contract. It was gazing into the soul of the Torah, the essence of God, and forming a powerful, deep bond with Hashem. God invests his essence into the Torah. Engaging in it is connecting with God himself. So when we engage with the Torah beyond reason, then we are connecting to the essence of God as well. How do we reach beyond and advance from the Torah's content to reach the deepest fourth dimension? It's very easy to say it, but what does it mean on a practical level? What do you do? What steps do you need to take? When we take the step to climb above, God then descends below and takes us there. But what is that step? What is that effort? What is the move that we need to do that will cause God to meet us halfway and raise us up even further? This is where we get back into the story of Yisro. Why was Yisro so important? Why was it that until Yisro came to the Jewish people, God was not ready to give the Jewish people the Torah? The reason is because what did Yisro represent? Yisro represented going beyond our own personal 3 amos, reaching up higher, stretching out our hand, going above and beyond that which is normal, that which is comfortable, that which is rational and logical, to connect with the essence of Hashem. What did Yisro do? He rejected his previous life. He transformed his whole lifestyle. And most importantly, he left his home, he left his place, and he moved out of his box where he was comfortable, and he went to join the Jewish people. This was radical. This was transformational. He went out of his comfort zone to go beyond himself, and that is what Hashem was waiting for. That's what it means to really connect to the Torah. Text number 16 from the Rebbe. The entire thrust of Matan Torah was about shattering the great divide between the upper and lower worlds, namely that a physical creature should be able to climb out of his or her natural limits and reach beyond into the divine. As such, Yisro's personal odyssey, which as mentioned, laid the groundwork for Matan Torah, mirrored this notion. He broke free of his personal limitations. After all, what made Yisro actually come? What compelled Yisro to shatter his personal limitations and join the Jews in a desolate desert? It was this idea, namely that Yisro was impacted in a way that he knew he had to actually come, to break free of his natural limitations, to give up his prestige as a Kohen of Midian, come to a desolate place and convert. This laid the groundwork for Matan Torah, and when God shattered the great divide between the upper and lower worlds. Yisro represents the person who goes out of their comfort zone, who moves away from his previous place and location in order to connect to God in the deepest way. Now, all of us have our own comfort zone when it comes to our relationship with the Torah and our observance of mitzvahs. We have a comfort zone. We feel comfortable. We do this particular number of mitzvahs. We observe this particular holidays, and we feel good. We're proud to be Jewish. We're happy to be Jewish, and we're engaged with these mitzvahs. On the one hand, it's good that we have a comfort with our own Judaism. On the other hand, we have placed ourselves in a box. We have limited our ability to grow. The message from Yisro is, how and when does God truly give us the Torah? When do we really enter into that relationship with God? When we go beyond our comfort zone, when we move out of that location, just as Yisro did, then God was willing to come down and give us the Torah. Yisro's bold and radical decision to join the Jewish people in the desert was the fourth dimension. To connect with Torah, action is required. Make a change and do something crazy. All right. What are we trying to say over here? Based on reason and logic alone, a person will stay in their comfort zone. Should I take upon myself a higher level of kosher observance? It's challenging. It's more expensive. There's limited stores, limited opportunities. It just doesn't make sense for me to do it. Should I increase my observance of Shabbos? Right? It's going to place various limitations, communications, relations with my neighbors. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. When a person solely uses your logic and your rationale when it comes to your relationship with God, it's very easy to box yourself in. What do we need to do? We need to lift up our hands. We need to lift up our hands above our head. We need to break free. We need to transcend our own logic and reason. Yes, do something crazy. That is how you access the core of your soul. That is how you access the core of the Torah. And that is how you enter into the most deep, intimate, personal relationship with God, by going out of your comfort zone. Does it sound a little crazy? Yes, but that is exactly the point. Right? How do you truly connect with the Torah? How do you truly connect with Hashem? Do something crazy. Go out of your comfort zone. Any questions, comments? If not, thank you so much for joining us for the weekly Torah Studies class.